Do you live along the southern coast of Mindanao? Do you have family in General Santos City in Sarangani province, in the municipalities of Glan or Malapatan or Kiamba? Are you one of the more than 86,000 people who is still sleeping away from home tonight in an evacuation center at a relative's house under a tarp because the earthquake 18 days ago left your home too damaged to return to? Then, what happened at 7:34 last night on the evening of June 26, 2026, matters directly to you. Because the ground moved again. A magnitude 6. 6 earthquake struck the Celebes Sea south of Mindanao, and it was felt across at least 6 provinces and 2 major cities. No tsunami warning was issued for last night's event. No casualties have been confirmed. But what the scientists are watching beneath the surface of this story, what the data coming out of the Cotabato Trench is actually telling the agencies who monitor this fault full-time, is something that demands your attention. Why did this happen again? What does it mean that 3 significant earthquakes have now struck the same fault system in 18 days? And what is the one question that PHIVOLCS scientists say still cannot be answered about what comes next? At 7:34 in the evening, Philippine Standard Time, the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, PHIVOLCS, recorded a magnitude 6 earthquake with its epicenter confirmed at 90 kilometers south of Balut Island in the municipality of Sarangani, Davao Occidental. The depth was placed at 10 kilometers beneath the seafloor. That shallow depth is critically important, and we will come back to exactly why it matters in a few minutes. On the ground, across the provinces closest to the epicenter, this is what people experienced. Intensity V shaking, categorized as strong, was reported in Kiamba, Malapatan, Malungan, and Alabel in Sarangani province, and in General Santos City and Coronadal City in South Cotabato. At intensity 5, the shaking is felt by everyone. Hanging objects swing noticeably, small unstable objects fall. Some people feel frightened and run outside. In Maitum, Maasim, Glan, Tupi, and parts of South Cotabato, intensity 4 was reported. Moderately strong, felt by everyone indoors, causing windows and doors to rattle and walls to creak audibly. Across Sultan Kudarat and into parts of Davao Occidental, Davao del Sur, and Cotabato, lower intensities were reported all the way out to the edges of the felt zone. In an ordinary week, a magnitude 6. 6 earthquake in this region would be significant news on its own, but this is not an ordinary week. Not for Mindanao, not for the Cotabato Trench, and to understand why, you have to go back 18 days to what happened on the morning of June 8th. At 7:37 in the morning on June 8th, 2026, the very first day of the new school year across Mindanao, the seafloor off the coast of Sarangani province ruptured. The initial estimate from PHIVOLCS placed the earthquake at magnitude 7. Within hours, it was revised upward to magnitude 7.8. The epicenter was located 24 kilometers west-southwest of Cablalan in Sarangani province at a depth of 33 kilometers. The rupture process lasted approximately 70 seconds. In those 70 seconds, one of the most powerful earthquakes to strike the Philippines in more than 3 decades was complete. It was the strongest earthquake in the country since 1990. The United States Geological Survey estimated peak shaking intensity at intensity 9, violent, in parts of western Sarangani. Approximately 7,000 people were within that zone of extreme shaking. An additional 51 million people experienced intensity 8, severe, shaking, including the residents of General Santos City, Glan, and Pulamolok. More than 3 million others across Sarangani, Davao region, and Bangsamoro experienced intensity 7. And across a vast area of central and southern Mindanao, including Cotabato City and Tagum, more than 6 million people experienced intensity 6 shaking. The seismic moment released in those 70 seconds was equivalent to 6. 14 times 10 to the 20th Newton meters, a number that, translated into human terms, means a planetary scale energy release concentrated into a single catastrophic instant. The destruction that followed was devastating and sustained. At least 81 people lost their lives across the affected provinces. More than 1,300 were injured. 31 remain missing as of June 26th. Across Mindanao, more than 87,000 homes were damaged or destroyed. The worst affected areas were General Santos City, the provinces of Sarangani and South Cotabato and Sarangani, and Davao Occidental. In the coastal town of Glan alone, at least 23 people were killed. In the remote municipality of Jose Abad Santos in Davao Occidental, 7 people died in 2 separate landslides that also cut portions of the town off from outside access. A landslide in Barangay San Isidro created a debris dam that formed a new lake where none had existed before. In General Santos City, 3 workers died when a warehouse wall collapsed. In Tupi, a man was killed when his house fell around him. Another resident died of cardiac arrest in the chaos. In the barangay of Patuco in Sarangani municipality, Davao Occidental, 5 of 9 confirmed deaths resulted from collapsed buildings within a single neighborhood. the Department of Education reported that more than 2 million students, 128,000 school staff, and over 6,200 public schools across 5 regions of Mindanao were affected. And all of this occurred on the very first morning of the school year. Children were sitting in flag ceremony assemblies. Teachers were calling the first roll of the new term. And then the ground began to shake. A tsunami warning was issued almost immediately for the coastlines of 9 provinces: Sarangani, Davao Occidental, Tawi-Tawi, Sulu, Basilan, Zamboanga del Sur, Zamboanga Sibugay, Sultan Kudarat, and South Cotabato. Approximately 10,000 families in Sarangani and Sultan Kudarat evacuated coastal areas. Indonesia's meteorological agency, BMKG, issued warnings and ordered evacuations in Gorontalo, the Maluku Islands, Sulawesi, Borneo, and the Sangihe Islands. 160 people were evacuated in Sangihe, and 94 homes there were reported damaged. Malaysia issued tsunami advisories for Tawau, Semporna, Kunak, and Lahad Datu along the Sabah coast. Japan issued advisories spanning from Ibaraki Prefecture all the way to Okinawa. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center warned that parts of the Philippine coastline could experience waves of up to 3 meters, with 1 meter waves possible along Indonesian and Malaysian coasts. The tsunami waves came. PHIVOLCS sea level monitoring stations recorded waves of approximately 1 meter at Kiamba and Masim in Sarangani, with a peak reading of approximately 4 meters at Kiamba. Additional waves were recorded at Calamansig in Sultan Kudarat, at Mati City, and in Zamboanga City. The warnings were eventually lifted, but the experience of tens of thousands of families grabbing their children and running uphill in the early morning darkness on the first day of school is not something any of those communities have put behind them. It is something they relive every single time the ground shakes again. By June 14th, just 6 days after the main shock, PHIVOLCS had already recorded more than 5,200 aftershocks. By June 19th, that number exceeded 8,500. Within that sequence, 3 individual aftershocks reached magnitude 6, 0 or above. Then on June 15th, 7 days after the main shock, a magnitude 6. 6 earthquakes struck the same system again, the same provinces, the same communities still processing what had happened a week earlier. Residents who had cautiously begun returning to check on their homes were sent back outside. People who had started sleeping in their own beds again grabbed emergency bags and headed back to evacuation areas. And now, on June 26th, 18 days after the main shock, the magnitude 6. 6 event at 7:34 in the evening represents the 3rd time this fault system has produced an earthquake at or above that threshold within this sequence. 3 events above magnitude 6. 5 in 18 days. The mainstream news cycle has moved on, but the Cotabato Trench has not. Here is what you need to understand about this fault system, and about something that most coverage of these earthquakes has not fully explained. The Cotabato Trench is not simply a crack in the seafloor. It is a subduction zone. It runs approximately 650 kilometers along the southwestern coast of Mindanao. Along this boundary, the oceanic crust of the Sunda Plate, the seafloor beneath the Celebes Sea, is being driven beneath the Philippine Mobile Belt at a rate of approximately 20 millimeters per year. That is less than the width of 2 stacked coins across a full year. But over centuries, that slow grinding accumulates stress in the surrounding rock in quantities that no engineering project has ever replicated or contained. Think of it this way. Every single year, 20 millimeters of plate convergence adds to a running total of stored elastic energy that has been building since long before any living person was born. And at irregular intervals, when the accumulated stress finally exceeds the frictional resistance holding the plates together, the fault slips. Sometimes the slip is modest, sometimes it produces an event like June 8th, and sometimes, as the historical record of this exact trench demonstrates, it produces something far larger. The history of the Cotabato Trench is a history of catastrophe. In 1918, a magnitude 8. 3 earthquakes struck the Celebes Sea in the same geological system. In 1976, the Moro Gulf earthquake reached a moment magnitude of 8. 1. That event generated a tsunami that swept across approximately 700 kilometers of Mindanao's coastline. The death toll exceeded 4,000 people. Entire coastal villages were erased. Communities that had stood for generations were gone within minutes of the wave arriving. The 1976 Moro Gulf earthquake remains one of the most catastrophic natural disasters in Philippine history. And PHIVOLCS director Teresito Bacolcol stated publicly and plainly after the June 8th event, the Cotabato Trench retains the structural capacity to produce earthquakes up to magnitude 8. 2. The June 8th earthquake at magnitude 7. 8 was not the maximum credible event from this system. It was not close to the maximum. And that single fact, rarely emphasized in headline coverage, consistently present in the official scientific assessments, is the most important geological reality hanging over southern Mindanao right now. But there is a second layer to this that is even more specific to the current moment, and it involves what the June 8th rupture did to the stress distribution along the rest of the Cotabato Trench. When a major earthquake ruptures a segment of a fault, the slip does not only affect that segment. The redistribution of stress in the surrounding rock reaches outward into neighboring sections of the fault system. Some neighboring segments experience a reduction in stress. They are temporarily less likely to rupture because the slip relieved pressure in their direction. But other segments absorb additional stress. They are pushed measurably closer to their own failure threshold. This is a well-documented physical process called Coulomb stress transfer, and following the June 8th main shock, researchers from Temblor, a seismic risk analysis organization working alongside scientists at Tohoku University, published an analysis identifying exactly which section of the Cotabato Trench may have absorbed additional stress as a direct result of the June 8th rupture. Their calculations identified approximately a 100-kilometer section of the trench, sitting between the area ruptured by the June 8th magnitude 7.8 earthquake to the south, and the area ruptured in a significant 2023 earthquake to the north, as a zone that may have received a Coulomb stress increase, a zone pushed closer to failure, not further from it. This section had not produced a major rupture since at least 1950, and possibly not since the 1918 magnitude 8. 3 event. It sits between 2 rupture zones. It carries stress that the June 8th event did not release and may have added to, and the spatial distribution of the aftershock sequence since June 8th has been tracking in a pattern consistent with this interpretation. The aftershock zone has been migrating. The June 26th magnitude 6 event struck in the southern portion of the zone researchers identified. Scientists are careful and precise about the limits of what this means. Individual earthquakes cannot be predicted. The aftershock sequence could continue to decline gradually, or the pattern could continue to develop. What the data says is that the unruptured 100-kilometer gap remains the feature of greatest scientific interest along the Cotabato Trench right now, and it remains unresolved. Return now to the detail that makes last night's earthquake particularly worth understanding, the confirmed depth of 10 kilometers. Earthquake depth is not a technical detail that applies only to scientists. It has a direct practical consequence for the people who live above a fault. The relationship is straightforward. A shallow earthquake at 10 kilometers depth transmits its seismic energy to the surface with far less absorption than a deeper event of the same magnitude. There is simply less rock between the rupture point and the ground beneath your home. A magnitude 6 at 10 kilometers produces significantly stronger surface shaking than the same magnitude event occurring at 50 or 80 kilometers depth, where the seismic energy has more material to travel through and more distance to dissipate in. The June 26th event was shallow. That is why General Santos City, more than 90 kilometers from the epicenter, still felt intensity of shaking. That is why intensity faux shaking was reported in communities spread across a wide geographic area. A shallow event amplifies local impact in ways that depth-adjusted seismic magnitude alone does not capture. And it is one reason why PHIVOLCS reports the depth of every earthquake alongside its magnitude, as a critical data point for understanding the real effect on the ground. For the families still living through this sequence across southern Mindanao, the human reality behind these seismic data points is something that numbers alone cannot carry. Think about what 3 weeks of this looks like from inside those communities. June 8th. Children at school assemblies running and screaming as the ground shook violently. Video of a building collapsing in General Santos, circulating on every phone screen within minutes. Hospitals overwhelmed. Coastal families running uphill with nothing but their children and whatever they could grab. Then the days that followed, sleeping in evacuation centers on whatever surface was available, waiting for engineers to inspect homes, watching the news cycle move on while the aftershocks continued coming. 8, 40, 100, 1,000. The 8,500 aftershocks recorded by June 19th are not a statistic to the people living through them. Each one is another moment of fear, another activation of the same emergency instinct that June 8th installed in their bodies. Every time the floor trembled, every time a window rattled, every time a child grabbed a parent's arm. That is what the aftershock sequence looks like from inside it. The government response has been substantial and sustained. By June 25th, the national government had provided over 510 million Philippine pesos in assistance to affected families. The Department of Social Welfare and Development deployed quick response teams from both its central office and regional field offices, with red alert status maintained. Mobile kitchens have been operating at evacuation centers. Tent cities remain in place in multiple municipalities across Sarangani and Davao Occidental. Infrastructure damage had already exceeded 1 billion pesos based on official accounting, with roads, bridges, government buildings, and school structures included in that total. All of Davao Occidental and Sarangani province remain under a state of calamity, along with General Santos City. Engineering inspections of damaged structures are ongoing. PHIVOLCS has consistently warned that buildings weakened by the June 8th main shock carry additional risk in any subsequent aftershock, and that no damaged structure should be reoccupied until cleared by a licensed structural engineer. Some of those inspections are still not complete, and through all of this, the displacement, the inspections, the rebuilding that has already begun, and the rebuilding that has not yet started, the Cotabato Trench kept producing aftershocks. And at 7:34 on the evening of June 26th, it produced another significant one. The monitoring infrastructure watching all of this is operating at full capacity. PHIVOLCS maintains a network of seismic stations across the region, staff-controlled stations in General Santos City, Kidapawan City, Cotabato City, and at the Mindanao Cluster Monitoring Center for Earthquake and Tsunami in Davao City, along with satellite telemetered stations in Don Marcelino and Davao Occidental, Bagumbayan in Sultan Kudarat, Piquet in Cotabato, and stations stretching across the width of Mindanao to the farthest edges of the affected zone. The Philippine Space Agency, PhilSA, has been generating satellite-derived analysis products throughout this event. Structural damage maps, coastal uplift assessments based on before and after imagery, nighttime lights products, tracking power restoration progress, and, as of June 20th, a new earthquake-induced landslide map covering approximately 137 hectares of landslide terrain across Glen and Jose Abad Santos. The international scientific community has also mobilized. Sentinel Asia and the Disasters Charter both activated formal response programs, providing additional remote sensing coverage under international cooperation agreements. The Cotabato Trench is being watched right now by more instruments, more analysts, and more international coordination than at any point in its recorded history. The guidance from PHIVOLCS for coastal communities has been consistent since the morning of June 8th, and it remains in effect tonight. When strong shaking occurs, do not wait for a formal warning before acting. Move immediately to higher ground. The natural signs of an approaching local tsunami, violent ground shaking, a sudden rise or fall in sea level, a roaring sound approaching from the direction of the ocean, require immediate action, not hesitation. A local tsunami generated from a fault as close as the Cotabato Trench can arrive at the nearest coastlines in a matter of minutes. The International Warning System and the National Warning System are as fast as human technology allows. But for communities sitting directly above a subduction zone, the physical reality is that the wave and the warning may arrive nearly simultaneously. PHIVOLCS. Director Bakalkol made this explicit in his public statements after June 8th. People in coastal communities must know and act on the natural tsunami signs immediately, without waiting for confirmation from any official source. The 1976 Moro Gulf earthquake, magnitude 8, one from the same Cotabato Trench system, generated a tsunami that devastated 700 kilometers of Mindanao coastline and killed an estimated 4,000 people. The world has better seismic monitoring, faster communication systems, and more comprehensive community evacuation planning today than existed 50 years ago. None of that changes the physics of the Cotabato Trench. None of it changes the fact that the trench retains the capacity for an earthquake up to magnitude 8. 2. None of it resolves the 100-kilometer unruptured section that researchers are watching. As of the evening of June 26, 2026, this is the confirmed picture. 3 earthquakes above magnitude 6. 5 have struck the Cotabato Trench system in 18 days. The June 8th main shock at magnitude 7. 8 was the strongest earthquake in the Philippines since 1990. The aftershock sequence has exceeded 8,500 recorded events. 81 people are confirmed dead. More than 1,300 were injured. 31 remain missing. Over 87,000 homes were damaged or destroyed. Nearly 164 million people across 635 barangays were identified as affected. More than 86,000 remain displaced. A permanent coastal uplift of approximately 2 meters has been documented across parts of Sarangani and Davao Occidental, with the coastline itself retreating by approximately 200 meters in some locations. PHIVOLCS has publicly confirmed the Cotabato Trench retains the capacity for earthquakes up to magnitude 8.2. Researchers have identified a 100-kilometer unruptured zone between the 2026 and 2023 rupture areas as the focal point of ongoing scientific monitoring. The June 26th magnitude, 6. 6 events struck at 10 kilometers depth, felt at intensity V or higher across 6 provinces and 2 major cities. No tsunami warning, no confirmed casualties. The aftershock sequence continues. PHIVOLCS continues issuing updates. The seismic network continues recording. The monitoring has not been reduced. The calamity declarations have not been lifted. The 100-kilometer gap between the 2026 and 2023 rupture zones has not resolved. And the agencies watching the Cotabato Trench right now, tonight, in real time as this video reaches you, have not issued any statement suggesting this sequence has peaked or concluded. The Cotabato Trench moved in 1918. It moved in 1976. It has now moved 3 times in June 2026 alone. The latest observations indicate the sequence is still evolving. More information is expected in the hours and days ahead. Sources: PHIVOLCS, Official Bulletins and Primer Report, June 2026, USGS Pager and Prompt Assessment of Global Earthquakes for Response, Tembler, Stein, and Toda, 2226, Philippines M7. 8. Shock may have loaded the Central Cotabato Subduction Zone, NDRRMC Situational Report, Mono. 13. June 21st, 2026, DSWD Dromic Report. Number 32, June 25th, 2026, 6 a.m. ADRC Disaster Report, Philippines Earthquake and Tsunami, 2026, Philippine News Agency, Inquirer, NET, Rappler, GMA News Online, Business World, Volcano Discovery Seismic Data, June 26th, 2026. There's one more dimension of this story that deserves its full weight before this update concludes, and it concerns the schools. The June 8th earthquake struck at 7:37 in the morning. That was not a random moment. Across Mindanao, June 8th was the first day of the school year for the 2026 to 2027 academic calendar. Students who had been on summer break were returning to classrooms for the first time. Teachers were preparing opening day lessons. School principals were overseeing flag ceremony assemblies in schoolyards across the region. And the ground shook with a violence that will mark that day in the memory of every student and teacher who experienced it. The Department of Education reported that over 2 million students and 128,000 staff across 5 regions of Mindanao were affected. More than 1,022 schools were damaged. Over 8,200 classes were suspended across affected school divisions in the days that followed. Video from multiple schools captured the terror of those first seconds. Children crouched on the ground screaming, teachers trying to guide students away from walls and under safe cover. A structure at the Mahaya High Elementary School collapsed as students and teachers fled its perimeter. At the Cotabato City Central Pilot Elementary School, students gathered for the flag ceremony assembly evacuated from school buildings when the ground shook. A dilapidated building at Mindanao National High School collapsed. The school confirmed the structure was unoccupied and no students were harmed, but the image of that collapse became part of the visual record of June 8th. For more than 3 million children, the first day of school in 2026 was also the most frightening day of their young lives. And some of those same children, now back in temporary classrooms or studying from evacuation centers, felt the ground shake again at 7:34 on the evening of June 26th. Understanding the scale of the infrastructure damage across southern Mindanao helps explain why the ongoing aftershock sequence carries continued risk even at lower magnitudes. Buildings that were structurally sound before June 8th absorbed damage in the main shock, some of it visible, some of it concealed within walls and foundations. A structure that looks intact on the outside may have compromised load-bearing capacity, cracked foundations, damaged connections between walls and roofs, weakened column beam joints in reinforced concrete buildings. PHIVOLCS has been explicit on this point. Structures weakened by the June 8th earthquake face additional risk in subsequent aftershocks. What would have been tolerable shaking for an undamaged building may be more than a compromised structure can absorb. This is why the engineering inspection process is not simply administrative paperwork. It is the difference between a family safely returning to their home and a family returning to a home that fails in the next significant aftershock. Some of those inspections are still incomplete. Some families are still waiting. And last night, those families and their inspectors and their communities felt the magnitude 6. 6 event roll through at 7:34 in the evening. The liquefaction risk across parts of the southern Mindanao coastal zone is another factor that does not disappear between major earthquakes. Liquefaction occurs when saturated sandy or silty soils lose their structural integrity during strong shaking. The water pressure within the soil increases to the point where the soil behaves temporarily like a liquid, causing structures built on it to sink, tilt, or shift, regardless of how well they were constructed above ground. Coastal zones with water-saturated soils are particularly susceptible, and many coastal communities in Sarangani and Davao Occidental sit on exactly this kind of terrain. The June 8th main shock triggered liquefaction in some areas, observable through ground subsidence, sand boils emerging from the soil surface, and lateral spreading in low-lying coastal zones. Subsequent aftershocks, including events at the level of magnitude 6. 6 can reactivate liquefaction in soils that have not yet fully drained and reconsolidated from the initial event. For families living in coastal areas on susceptible soils, this adds a layer of risk that goes beyond the shaking intensity reported on the PHIVOLCS scale. It is one more reason why engineering assessments of coastal structures following the June 8th event require time and care. PHIVOLCS has also documented what may be the most visually striking consequence of the June 8th earthquake outside of the direct structural damage, the permanent physical transformation of the Mindanao coastline. Aerial surveys conducted in the days following the main shock found corals previously submerged beneath the Celebes Sea, now exposed above the waterline. The coastline had been elevated by approximately 2 meters, with the waterline retreating by approximately 200 meters in places. This coastal uplift was a direct consequence of the fault movement along the Cotabato Trench. The same thrust faulting mechanism that produced the earthquake also pushed sections of the adjacent seafloor and coastline upward. What had been ocean floor became dry land. Fishing communities that had operated from the same beaches for generations found their access to the water physically changed. Boat channels that had existed for decades were suddenly shallower or exposed. The geography had changed. And on that changed geography, families are still trying to rebuild their lives and their livelihoods, 18 days after the earthquake that produced it. The June 26th, magnitude 6. 6 earthquake is not happening to people who are fully recovered and fully restored. It is happening to people who are still in the middle of one of the most difficult periods in the recent history of their region. One of the questions that community members across the affected area have been asking since June 8th, and that families in General Santos, in Glan, in Kiamba are asking again tonight after last night's event, is whether the pattern of earthquakes they are experiencing is normal for a post-main shock sequence, or whether it represents something more unusual. Scientists provide a careful answer to this. Aftershock sequences after major earthquakes are expected, and they typically follow a mathematical decay pattern over time known as Omori's law. Aftershocks occur most frequently immediately after the main shock and gradually decline in frequency over weeks, months, and in some cases years. A magnitude 7. 8 main shock will typically be followed by a sequence that produces aftershocks for a very long period. Some of those aftershocks will be strong enough to be felt, some will be strong enough to cause damage. The occurrence of magnitude 6 plus aftershocks weeks after a large main shock is within the range of documented behavior for comparable global earthquake sequences. But there are 2 specific features of the June 2026 Cotabato sequence that scientists have noted as warranting close attention. The first is the spatial migration of the aftershock zone northward along the trench in a pattern consistent with Coulomb stress transfer models. The second is the presence of that 100-kilometer unruptured gap between the 2026 and 2023 rupture zones, a section of the trench that, based on historical records, has not ruptured in over a century. The combination of these 2 features keeps the sequence in the category of active scientific monitoring at the highest level of attention that PHIVOLCS and international partner agencies apply. As the agencies monitoring this fault publish their next updates, and as the seismic network continues recording every movement from the Cotabato Trench in real time, the situation across southern Mindanao remains, in the assessment of the scientists and emergency officials watching it most closely, a situation that is still developing. The displaced families are still displaced. The engineering inspections are still ongoing. The monitoring has not been reduced. The questions that could not be answered on June 8th have not all been answered yet. And the ground moved again last night at 7:34, shaking 6 provinces, reminding every person across the region that the Cotabato Trench is still active, still watched, and still unfinished. Officials are expected to provide updated assessments in the hours ahead based on the latest seismic data and on-the-ground reports from June 26th. The monitoring continues.